Okay, let's, I think we've got a good number here. Welcome everyone to this month's SVIN session. My name is Krishna Amaluru. I'm a neurointerventionalist in Indianapolis with Goodman Campbell. I am here with with our co-chair of the Web NIR committee, Dr. Chancellor, who's a neurointerventionalist in the New York, New Jersey area with neurosurgeons of New Jersey and an associate professor at NYU. Today, we have a very exciting topic. We are going to be talking about the use of artificial intelligence in aneurysm detection and tracking. Artificial intelligence is a really hot topic right now in the neurointerventional world, not let alone the entire medical sphere. We are very happy to have Dr. Fiorella here with us talking about the Rapid Advantage. We are very, very thankful to have our sponsor, Rapid, to host this session. So with that, Bree, can you please introduce Dr. Fiorella, and we'll get
Absolutely.
started.
Thanks, Krishna. Dr. Fiorella is a director of Stony Brook Cerebral Vascular and Comprehensive Stroke Center and a professor of neurosurgery and radiology who joined Stony Brook in 2009. He is a pioneer in the field of neuro-IR, advancing new devices and techniques for the treatment of cerebrovascular disease. We are so excited to have you. He is a legend, and I'm looking forward to learning more about this topic. So take it away.
Thanks for the super kind introduction. Thanks everybody for taking a few minutes to attend the webinar today. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the RapidAI software and how we use it at Stony Brook, sort of in regular practice, and how it may be useful to you guys in your practice. I'm not really capable of a high-end discussion of mathematics or anything about machine learning or anything like that. You can ask me questions about that, but I was told that there would be no math, so we'll go from there. So I have a number of disclosures, including I do some consulting for RapidAI that I've listed here. So Stony Brook is a large tertiary care hospital, and it's in Suffolk County, which is like the world's largest suburb of New York City. So it's an exurban suburban population. We have 3 hospitals that feed cases into us primarily, but there are several small hospitals in Suffolk County that do send us cases. The hospitals that are within our network are Southampton Hospital and ELI that are out in the East End. And so the population of the county depends, it fluctuates depending on the season, but in the summertime, it gets up to around 2 million. We have a mobile stroke unit program, and we get about 8,000 calls over the past 5 years. So it's a little bit over 1,200 calls. 1,200 calls a year for that. And the mobile stroke unit CT scanners are also hooked up to the Rapid software. So that allows me to see patients who are on the mobile stroke unit and getting scanned. I can see their CTs and their CTAs, which is great after hours and on weekends, because I can, no matter where I am, without logging into PACS or anything, just look at my phone and look at the Rapid and notify the team and anesthesiology to drive in, meet the patient at the ER door, and go directly to the angio suite from the ambulance rather than having to stop in the ER, get any other additional imaging or anything like that. So it's really been tremendous for that. And we've partnered
Dr.
with
Fiorella, sorry to interrupt you. I think your video is somehow turned off. I don't know if you.
Yeah, I took off my personal video and put it off because it's sometimes
got it. Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Sorry.
Thanks for pointing it out. Yeah, so we've partnered with RapidAI for many years now. I think it's going on 4 or 5 years. And we've incorporated it into our system, and we use it in day-to-day practice for everything. We're going to focus a little bit on the aneurysm part of the software. I know you're all familiar with the stroke part of the software, but we'll talk primarily about aneurysm today. This is just a picture of Suffolk County. So it's like if you cut Long Island in half, we basically have this entire East End part here that we service for stroke and aneurysm care. So if you look at the existing data, I was kind of surprised to find out some of this myself as I looked through it. But if you take a standardized set of CTAs that have, some of which have aneurysms, some of which don't, and you submit it to a group of radiologists to read, the miss rate for cerebral aneurysms ranges quite significantly based on the size and location of the aneurysms, but it's been reported to be as high as 15%. So not an insignificant number of aneurysms are missed on CTA, even when people are reading the studies knowing that they're looking for aneurysms. In addition, when we find patients who have aneurysms within a hospital network, so if you look at patients who have reports that call out an aneurysm, significant proportion of these, about a quarter, are lost to follow-up, so they never get another follow-up scan, and so they're lost to the hospital network, which potentially exposes the network to liability and certainly represents a significant amount of lost revenue. If you look at aneurysms that you are following and that are in your practice and that you're doing serial MRAs on, I was also surprised at this number. The growth rate for cerebral aneurysms is around 5% a year. So the enlargement, I had always thought it was really unusual to see in practice, but it's actually fairly common. 1 in 20 aneurysms that you'll see will grow. And so you should be expecting kind of once a month in clinic or something like that, likely with all the follow-ups that we see, seeing some aneurysm that's grown or changed. And that's really significant because if aneurysms have grown in size, the rupture rate is substantially higher than the rupture rate of aneurysms that have not grown. And so here's just some useful references in terms of things that you can use if you're talking to your hospital administration about the importance of software like the RapidAI software for aneurysms. So this is a study looking at phases scores, whether that can predict intracranial aneurysm growth. But the interesting thing here is of the 557 patients with over 700 aneurysms they followed, 12% demonstrated some growth over 2.7 years. So again, that comes out to be about 5% per year, but that seems like a steady growth rate. So you can imagine if you have somebody in your practice, you're following them for 5 years, the chances that you're going to see growth of that aneurysm is not insubstantial. And then this is the data looking at aneurysms that have had growth. So again, in this study, over a couple of years of follow-up, they looked at 258 aneurysms. They saw a growth rate of 1 in 5 over their follow-up period of time. Growth was particularly common for larger aneurysms. And again, if aneurysms had grown, the risk of rupture was about 12-fold higher. So again, keeping a close eye on these things and watching them once they're into follow-up and you've retained them in your hospital system for follow-up is critical, because if they do grow, the chances that they'll rupture is fairly high.
And all of these studies are based on human reads?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are all human reads.
Yep.
And then this is just another study, again, looking at the rates of growth and the risk of growth. And so at 6 months, the rate of rupture after growth is already up to 3%, at 1 year up to about 5%, and then 2 years, 6%. So again, if these aneurysms grow, they're much more lethal and dangerous than aneurysms that have demonstrated no growth. So something that's critical. So the way that the Rapid Aneurysm program works is as follows. I think the most valuable sort of component of it is the triage portion of this program. So if you get the Rapid Aneurysm software, basically what happens is every single CTA and every single MRA that comes through your network is looked at by the software. And average processing time is on the order of about 8 minutes. And so the radiologist who's reading these out, if depending on when they get to the study, should have access to a RapidAI read of the study as well that may alert them to the presence of a cerebral aneurysm. So the way I think about this is that it's a second pair of eyes, basically, that's looking at every single study that comes through. So everything, a single CTA, every single MRA that comes through your institution and potentially your network is being looked at by a second pair of eyes that kind of nudges the radiology guys, like, hey, have a second look at this. There might be an aneurysm, and it highlights it for them so they can kind of go back and have a second look at the source data and take a look at it. The other feature that's particularly useful is you can set a threshold for your alert. So if you're one of the interventional people, one of the cerebrovascular people in your network, you can set up the Rapid software to alert you by email of any aneurysm that has been detected over a certain size. And so basically, I'm just going through the day, doing my normal stuff, doing cases, seeing clinic, and you'll check your phone and you'll see a Rapid report, and it says right in the subject line, aneurysm detected, and it'll give you a measurement like 6 or 7 millimeters. If you see something like that, immediately like open up the email and take a look at it. It gives you a couple thumbnail pictures there. And those are situations where, you can go onto the PACS, take a look, see where the patient is, potentially call the ER, call whoever ordered the study and say, hey, I noticed that I got an alert to my phone that there's this aneurysm that was just detected, and I looked at the study and it's a real aneurysm. Happy to see the patient follow up. So it's a nice way that kind of protects the emergency room, protects your hospital network from missing these patients. Initially, when we got the software, the processing time was quite a bit longer than 8 minutes. It was on the order of hours. And so it wasn't uncommon that I get an alert to my phone, say on Monday morning, and there was a patient Sunday night who was in the ER who ended up getting sent home with an aneurysm. We have to call that person back. Now the turnaround time is much faster, that the radiologists who are looking at the study should have these data before they're finalizing a report. So anyway, it's a nice feature and it's a nice fail safe, because again, it's not something that should be insulting or intimidating to the radiology staff. It's similar to all the automated pathology programs that look at say pap smears or something like that provide a second read, or similar to some of the other radiology software. I think mammography does this, that has sort of a computer automated second pair of eyes read. And you'll be surprised at the number of cases that come through that were not detected for one reason or another. Once you see the case, you get these thumbnails on your phone, but what you also can do is click on a link, and the link will take you into the surgical preview. And what the surgical preview is a much more sophisticated, much more refined demonstration of the aneurysm. And so it'll give you this 3-dimensional printout on your phone that you can even rotate on your phone or on your computer or on a laptop or something like that, and get a really high fidelity 3-dimensional reconstruction of the CTA or MRA source data. And it gives you multiple measurements of the aneurysm in multiple different planes that it will show you, and also volumetric measurements of the aneurysm. And you can imagine the surgical preview in the case of a detection is useful, because if it's something that you're thinking about treating, or you're going to treat, or say it's a patient with subarachnoid hemorrhage that's ruptured, you can already start manipulating this on your phone, and the level of reconstruction is much higher than what you're going to get from the typical sort of rapid thumbnails that come through, or even from a lot of the computer post-process software off of the scanners. So it's a nice look at the aneurysm that you can use for treatment planning or deciding, this is a surgical case or an endovascular case. So there's multiple levels of functionality of the software that I find useful in a day-to-day basis. So you basically have your referring spoke hospitals. All of the studies are being run through these, and then they're all going to myself at Stony Brook Hospital, and my partner Reza also gets these alerts on his phone, so that we're able to see these aneurysms that are coming through the system and make sure that they're appropriately triaged and that they're arranged for follow-up or treatment if needed. So it will detect more aneurysms through your system. And then I'll talk about this a little bit later. When we see these patients in clinic with their serial follow-ups, I'll look at the clinic list the week before, or my people look at the clinic list the week before, identify patients who are attending clinic for specifically follow-up aneurysms, which represent probably like 20% of the clinic patients that we see. And if we alert the Rapid gang, these are the patients that are coming through, they can either be uploaded by us manually at the site or by the Rapid people. They load them up, and then we get a printout that shows us all the aneurysms for the week that we're going to follow, and you can click on them and get the surgical preview view of it, and they'll give you like last year's CTA, this year's CTA. You can compare the sizes in multiple different dimensions as well as the volumes. And conceivably, this could demonstrate to us, much more subtle types of growth of aneurysms. And you could see growth you wouldn't necessarily pick up just sort of in a busy clinic day scrolling through source images, especially if you think about your typical like 4 or 5 millimeter, PCOM aneurysm or infundibulum or whatever that you're following, detecting, minimal growth in these things, especially in a busy day where they look basically the same, is going to be a little bit difficult. This is just, again, not something that replaces the physician, not something that's going to, get rid of the neuroradiology department or anything like that. It's basically just something that we can use as an additional fail-safe to provide a second, more sophisticated look at the imaging real time that you can use to help you take better care of your patients in clinic. And so there were some questions that you guys had submitted. And again, my knowledge of this particular aspect is not great, but to get it cleared through FDA, obviously it had to be trained. The algorithm had to be trained, and then once it's trained, it's tested. So after looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of aneurysm cases and having it trained by qualified neuroradiologists, they ran a validation study. I'll look at this. They ran a validation study of over 250 cases. And then the software read the cases, and then 2 radiologists read the cases. If they disagreed, there was a 3rd radiologist to break the tie in terms of aneurysm versus no aneurysm. And they did validation work and found fairly high sensitivity and specificity for the rapid reads when compared to the manual reads as the gold standard. So pretty high sensitivity and specificity. And you can play with the level of detection in terms of the size of what you're calling an aneurysm and not. And you can alter it to make it either very, very sensitive or very, very specific. So you can change sort of the thresholds whereby you're looking for aneurysms and adjust your ROC curve accordingly, just depending on how many emails you want to get and how many aneurysms you want to look for. So again, for the incidental aneurysm detection for the triage,
Actually, Dr. Fiorella, I'd like to actually just shed a little bit of light back on that last slide there, because I think, could you go back to the last slide?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so for the audience, this detection product, as far as I, understand it, is based on, it all falls under the sphere of machine learning, or specifically deep learning, which uses a system called convolutional neural networking, which is a system basically designed for processing grid imaging and learning the spatial hierarchies through, what they call layers or convolutional layers, hundreds or thousands of them. And in this situation, the grid is CTA or MRA imaging. And in this situation, those images have to be labeled by a human in this situation. And there's a lot of data now that the convolutional neural networking are actually creating their own training sets, which replaces the training of human labeled imaging. But I was just wondering if we can talk a little bit more about this training data set, because as we know, high quality annotated data sets are absolutely critical for training these neural networks. Can you shed any light on those 266 cases, those neuroradiologists? Was the data set adjudicated by digital subtraction angiography, or was it only CTA or MRA? Do you have any sense of the training data set of that went into the segmentation technology?
I don't know anything in specific about the data set or the size of the aneurysms or even the proportion of the aneurysms. The rapid people might have more insight into that. I know there were CTA studies, and those were not angiographically validated. There was just expert neuroradiologists looked at the CTAs. And so there were things that you'd reasonably think were aneurysms that neuroradiologists agreed that they would have called an aneurysm on the study. So patients who, potentially would warrant a further study like an angiogram, or patients who would go into follow-up in the absence of any kind of invasive imaging.
Got it. Well, at least it was 3 neuroradiologists. I've seen, ground truth labeling done by 1 neuroradiologist. So it's certainly promising that there were 3, and 266 cases is a decent size. There are some data sets that are limited to, less than 50. So that's certainly promising. And then when that last data set, that last bullet point, it says range of sizes and locations. Do you know if there was a cutoff of the training set? I've seen aneurysms that have been including in these data sets only 5 millimeters and greater. Do you know if there was a minimum size for the?
I asked those guys about the aneurysm sizes that were included. Their ranges are listed here, but I do not have that data. So this is like not published. It was just submitted to FDA for approval by these guys. So there's not like a PDF or anything that I have that talks about this. And preparing the slides, I did ask a little bit about this. And so perhaps the rapid people at the end of this can provide some additional insight into the specifics of the validation study.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, again, this is by no means meant to replace anybody who's looking at these films. It's just a second pair of eyes, which is, I think, really critically important, given the volume of scans that are being done now, the volume of scans that we look at, the volume of scans that your radiologists are looking at, and then if you think about your hub and spokes, like your network, like you guys, because you're interventionalists, are likely at the big hospital, the mothership, and the quality of radiology that you're used to dealing with there is probably super, super high. When you get to the outlying hospitals, like the smaller hospitals in the network, some of them have their own neuroradiology or radiology groups, and maybe general radiologists reading these studies, or people who are not just looking at neuro studies are reading these studies. And so, again, having some computer augmentation of their interpretations, I think is important. So this is just a case that came through. So this guy got scanned in the emergency room, and the bolus isn't great, but it got read out as normal, and the patient got sent home from the emergency room. And you can see that the carotid looks funny here. It looks like there's a little bit of a bump on the carotid. So I got an alert to my phone. There was a 6 millimeter aneurysm. And so again, 6 millimeters is something I'm going to definitely take a look at. And these are the actual sort of pictures that come over to the phone that show that there's, possible carotid ophthalmic aneurysm. And so tracked the patient down, brought them to clinic. My PA staff is awesome with this. So I see this and I just take a screenshot of it and text the gang, and they find the patient and schedule him to see us in clinic, figure out what's going on with him, make sure he's not sudden severe headache, worst headache of life or something. And if they're not, if it was done for some incidental reason, which this was, we just see him in clinic. And so the surgical preview, again, gives you a much better look at the aneurysm in terms of a much more detailed view of it. But you can see here, the limitations of the CTA data set. So just note in your mind how the aneurysm looks here and how the aneurysm looks here. So carotid ophthalmic aneurysm, you can see there's something there. But again, this really gets at the limitation of CTA, which is going to be important when we come and talk a little bit about follow-up. So that's what it looks like on the CTA source images that are then taken into the RAPID program and post-process. So there's an excrescence from the blood vessel, but it looks like sort of one big globule. So when you do the angio, it actually looks a little bit different than that. You could see there's this sort of dysplastic segment of the vessel with these two fairly nasty looking lobules off of this segment here. And so it really was segmental disease with multiple irregular lobulations cephalad to it. So this is actually a patient who we ended up treating with a pipeline, who would have not otherwise been treated or detected or even followed in our system. And this guy's younger guy who's healthy. And so that's a case that certainly we would have missed, would have never gotten any follow-up, and we would have never known about it. We're looking at this now at Stony Brook. So the natural question is, well, how good is this? And sort of you guys got onto that with the validation study a little bit. And the bottom line is we don't really know, in fact, what the value this is bringing to a health system. So we can kind of calculate this, and I have some hand wavy statistics at the end of this where you can kind of guesstimate it, that are useful to bring to your administration at this point in terms of justifying the cost of the software and the benefit of having it at the institution. But basically what we're looking at is, since we've been working with RAPID and we've had the triage program for so long, we have thousands and thousands of CTAs and MRAs that have been reviewed. And so my partner has luckily a gigantic army of medical students who are super enthusiastic to do research. And so they're going back and looking at all the reports for RAPID and all the reports for radiology and seeing how many aneurysms were detected in general, how good the program was at seeing those aneurysms that were detected by our radiology staff, looking for aneurysms that were seen on RAPID that weren't seen on the radiology reads, and then trying to figure out what the disposition of those patients were. And so we're trying to calculate or sort of quantify a number of different metrics in terms of size, morphology, locations of the aneurysms, and then what happened to these patients if we found an aneurysm with RAPID that was not read on the original report or required an addendum on the original report. What happened to these patients? Were they followed? How many were treated? And so what we're trying to do basically is just get a little bit more granular information in a real world setting, looking retrospectively at thousands of cases to see basically what is the rate of true positive, true negative, false positive, false negative, and the predictive values related to these messages that you're getting on your phone for aneurysms, just to sort of quantify how useful this is. How many aneurysms a year would we have missed? Out of those ones that we would have missed, how many ended up getting followed and how many ended up getting treated? And so there's better data coming in the future, but really this validation data for a lot of these available AI algorithms are still pending.
That will be a really Oh, sorry, Dr. Farrell. I was just going to say that will be a really nice retrospective data. I will just say there is some prospective data in terms of overall sensitivity of these systems, but they're used very locally with, less than 20 patients. But the data
Yeah.
does suggest that the overall sensitivity of an AI detection system at least approaches human overall sensitivity, if not surpasses it in some instances. So yeah, is that study planned, or is that going on right now at Stony Brook?
It's ongoing, but as you can imagine, it's a pretty heavy lift. But like I said,
Yeah.
we've got like an army of people working on this, and so
Yeah, that'll
they're
be fascinating.
steady progress. Hopefully, sometime 2025, we'll have some reasonable data to present. The second kind of application that we use the Rapid for, that I sort of alluded to a little bit, is just following aneurysms, because the ability to sort of quantify volumetric measurements and volumetric sort of morphology characteristics is much better with their reconstruction algorithms than it is with most of the reconstruction algorithms that we get off of the commercially available software from the imaging machines. So it is helpful potentially in looking at various cases. So there's a lady that I had in clinic and follow up, and she's older. She's like in her mid-70s or something. And she had this little SCA aneurysm that we've been following forever and ever. And since 2017, it kind of stayed at 4 or 5 millimeters. And then all of a sudden, it looked different. Like the lobular portion was the same, but then there was a sort of excrescence portion off the lateral aspect of it that looked bigger to us. And this scan was done not because we had ordered it, but she was admitted for a DVT, and so they were going to anticoagulate her. And so the medicine team was like, "Oh, we better just see if the aneurysm is unchanged or not." So like your level of suspicion here with some lady you've been following since 2017 is like approaching zero that it's grown or changed, because you got all these follow-ups. And you didn't order this for symptoms. It's not like she came in with a terrible headache or a bleed or something like that. You're ordering this basically because they want to anticoagulate her, which for like a 78-year-old lady, you blow through the source images and just be like, yeah, it looks about the same, you're fine. So anyway, looking at this, it did look like it may have been a little bit bigger, but when it got into the Rapid, it was clear that it had grown, substantially in size. It wasn't just like a little bit bigger, but if you look at the volume, it's like almost double in volume. And so when you look at the overlay, you could see there's a sort of lateral excrescence from the aneurysm that's completely new. And so again, with this type of growth, with like a doubling in volume and a good, 1.5 millimeter growth in size, this is something that we would entertain treating. So even an older patient, with web now, this is a super easy thing to treat. We just go up and put a web in through a, radial access left for 10-minute case to put a web in there and just protect the dome of the aneurysm, leave it fairly away from her SCAs. So that was again a case that really easily could have just blown by the goalie pads and been missed. And somebody who's got a growing aneurysm is going to be anticoagulated. And you can imagine, she's in that 12x increased risk of bleeding for an SCA aneurysm that's now, approaching 7 millimeters and has grown. Like that's not an insubstantial rupture rate for somebody. And if that person's on Eliquis, it's going to be a real problem. So I was very thankful to have it there. This is just an example case. This isn't really from Stony Brook, but I wanted to have a case to sort of illustrate an important point here. So there's a patient with 2 aneurysms who's got a prior and a follow-up. And, again, this is the kind of thing, like if you're looking at the source images, there's like no way in hell you're going to say like, oh yeah, this 4 millimeter aneurysm is now 4.2 millimeters. But you can see morphologically, it does look a lot different than it did on the prior study. And when you do an overlay, one of the nice things that the surgical preview has is got this overlay feature where you can take the old image and it will overlay the new image. And so you can see there's this area where there's, growth or a different area of lobulation here that is suggesting it's substantially larger than the previous study, but it's larger in all dimensions. And so it's really difficult to get this on a linear measurement. The volumetric measurements, because they're going to use growth in all dimensions, is going to be a lot more significant, especially for smaller aneurysms. Even like a 0.5 millimeter, 1 millimeter growth in a 4 millimeter aneurysm is going to really tremendously increase the volume. So the question is though, this is a 4 millimeter aneurysm. We're following this MRA. If we're on scanner 1 versus scanner 2, or the patient's blood pressure is 120 on one exam and 160 on another exam, or the patient's on, had a good functioning heart, that was last year, and then our heart attack in the interval, cardiac output's not as good. there's about 1 billion reasons why aneurysms could look different from one year to the other year. By a little bit, that could be technical and not at all related to aneurysm growth. So it could be the bolus characteristics, the hemodynamics of the patient, the scan, the technique of the scan. You know, sometimes patients have an outside imaging and imaging in-house. So another thing is how much growth is actually growth. And that's something that's really important and not something people have spoken to very much. So there's papers in the literature, some of which are a little bit questionable, where like we're talking about how AI programs are great at detecting like minute growth in aneurysms, but then when you look at the actual examples there of growth, it's pretty striking that, you know, there's some of these studies that have examples of quote growth and showing increased detection of growth, where like the actual growth of the aneurysm is pretty questionable, meaning that as we understand it, knowing the voxel size on MRA and CTA, the amount of growth that we're detecting or reporting is below the voxel size on the imaging. And so, again, how much growth is actual growth is something that we're trying to get at. So another project that Reza and his crew are looking at are patients who had multiple follow-ups, say over 5 years or something, where they got five aneurysm measurements. Where 1 year it's a little bigger, 1 year it's a little smaller, 1 year it's a little bigger, 1 year it's a little smaller, to just kind of get an idea of what the normal variance is for MRA follow-up and CTA follow-up, and then to calculate kind of what falls outside of 2 standard deviations for MRA and CTA. So you get a little bit better idea of when you get growth of X%, like, is this really growth of the aneurysm, or is this something that's going to falling well within the bell curve of variance, just technical variance between the 2 studies? And so we're just trying to gain insight into that, again, by looking at this gigantic retrospective database of cases that the aneurysm software has looked at for us, and again, try to quantify basically these metrics, and so we can educate ourselves and the community in terms of, you know, when the alarm bell should go off that this represents potentially real growth, and when you want to do an angiogram or some much more high resolution study to sort this. Incidental aneurysm detection, again, kind of gets us back to the triage program and the ability to apply that network-wide and reduce loss to follow-up and get patients to the hub when they need to. And so this just gets to what's called anchoring bias. So patients come in for one reason, they bonked their head or got in a car accident. You know, there's a tremendous miss rate of aneurysms that are not insubstantial in size. And so these are just some examples of aneurysms that were not detected in the radiology reports that were seen on rapid. And they're always, you know, like the paraclinoid aneurysms that are on the clinoid on CTA can be really difficult to detect, easier on MRA than CTA. These lateral clinoidal aneurysms, again, really difficult because a lot of times they're in the clinoid, they're right next to the bone, and it's hard to perceive irregularity of the carotid. And it seems like the AI program's much better at that. A lot of times these little choroidal.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a question on whether the AI program can put the bone on there so you can see the relationship to the dural ring to help if it's like something where you're not sure if it's in the brain or out of the brain.
Yeah, usually what we do is once you know it's there, it's pretty easy to see on the source imaging, like anything else.
Yeah.
And then you just, like, once you get this on your phone, you just go back to you have the medical record number and the patient identifiers. You just have to dig it up and look at it and sort of sort through. Because a lot of these turn out to be nothing. Like, you look through it and it's like the ophthalmic artery was really tortuous, the scan was bad, the patient moved, and it made it look like a blob. And so, you know, a lot of these we look at and they're nothing. But if you see a 5 millimeter aneurysm that comes through on your phone, a lot of times on the thumbnails, you can tell that this is nothing, it's an infundibulum, this is not something to be worried about. But then every once in a while you see one and you're like, oh, hey, I better look at the source images. And then some of those turn out to be nothing, and some of them turn out to be a real something. And then you have to look and see what happened to the patient. But in these incidental cases where the patients had trauma or something like that, those paraclinoid aneurysms, carotid ophthalmic aneurysms are super easy to miss. A lot of the choroidal and PCOM aneurysms as well are quite easy to blow by, and even sometimes like MCA bifurcations, the smaller ones are easy to miss. And so these patients end up going in a follow-up usually, because the ones that are being missed that are kind of proximal to the skull base a lot of times are ones that we're not going to treat, like these little SHA aneurysms and small MCA aneurysms, small PCOM aneurysms. We're not going to treat those, but they still go into serial follow-up because of that fairly significant incidence of growth. And so when you're talking to your hospital administrators, if you don't have one of these software programs, you're trying to justify it, like all these patients that are retained in your system for serial follow-up are really important. So if you're retaining them in your system and you're doing the serial MRAs or CTAs in your practice, that's generating a tremendous amount of background echo revenue for your hospitals and hospital systems that justify the cost of the software. In addition, like the medical legal liability, just for one of these cases, if God forbid, one of these SHA or carotid ophthalmic aneurysms that was, in the order of 5 millimeters that you missed because of a clinoid or because the patient bonked their head or because it was a busy day, goes by the goalie pads, and then that patient comes back in your same ER with a massive subarachnoid hemorrhage a couple of months later, and the family's like, oh hey, we just had a CTA, how is it not seen? Like one medical legal case that this saves, one settlement against the hospital pays for the software probably for the entire lifetime of whatever interventionist convinced the administration to get it. So patient care obviously is the most important thing, but also medical legal liability is critical. And another way that, again, is useful in talking to your administrators in terms of justifying why this is really important to have, RapidAI or a similar program in your.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that the use of this technology for rupture prediction is kind of like the holy grail of the potential for this technology. And just going back to kind of what you were saying, what growth is growth. I think that we certainly have all these patients that we're just following, and as that SCA aneurysm that you showed, minimal growth in one linear dimension, it's very hard to determine what volumetric increase that represents. And our group looked at this same technology in the follow-up of several thousands of aneurysms, and we actually looked at 5 aneurysms that were being followed conservatively that eventually went on to rupture. And in using the rapid technology in a retrospective setting, we were able to find that 5 of those aneurysms had at least a minimal volumetric growth of 6% and a minimal linear growth of 2%. So I think using this technology will certainly change the overall prediction paradigm, and I think that is the real the real strength of this technology. But Dr. Fiorella, do you think that that overall technology can be combined, or are there any opportunities for multimodal data in following aneurysms? Is there a potential to combine linear and or volumetric growth with other risk factors? Do you think that can be combined with patient risk factors, family history, et cetera? Is there a pathway for that going forward?
Yeah, eventually with all the AI and machine learning programs, I think ultimately what you'll end up in a situation, 20 years from now, after we're all retired, somebody will come in and get their follow-up scan, and there'll be a program like this that analyzes it in 20 million different directions and provides you with like a yearly rupture rate and a treatment recommendation potentially. Like, who knows where things are going to go in the future. I think it'll probably progress outside of our field of medicine first, meaning like you have, cancer, lung cancer, and these receptors, and it'll tell you exactly what chemotherapeutic agent you want to use and what your survival rates are and all this stuff. But yeah, I imagine all medicine is eventually going to go that way, where you have sort of multifactorial inputs, both clinical and imaging based inputs, and that those will be put into a big program, and it'll take the available high-level clinical data, and the program will be trained to sort of give you guidance in terms of what the next best step is, in terms of what interval you should do follow-up imaging at, or whether you should do a more advanced study like an angiogram, or if you should actually think about treating the patient. But I think that's ultimately where medicine is headed. Most decisions I think are going to be computer assisted, whether they're financial or medical or military or any of that stuff. Ischemic stroke is another thing where we're doing tons of scans where there's a strong anchoring bias, and so like if you're looking at ischemic stroke, you're definitely looking at the blood vessels, but you're not necessarily looking for aneurysms, and so that's an issue because what causes aneurysms? Smoking, vascular disease, and so the rate of aneurysms in the general population is usually estimated around 2%. Ischemic stroke patients, particularly those with large vessel occlusion, it's significantly higher. It's in the order of 10% in a lot of studies, and so there's a much higher risk of cerebral aneurysms in patients who are being studied for ischemic stroke. And you're also not necessarily looking for aneurysms, so it's easy to blow by these, especially because we're looking, those of us who are interventionalists who are really keyed into aneurysms, we're looking at these studies really quickly to know if we have to do a thrombectomy in the next 10 minutes rather than whether the patient's got like an incidental finding someplace. So these are just, again, examples of patients who had aneurysms that were detected using the Rapid software, would initially come in for occlusions. And so, this big aneurysm was seen, but the smaller aneurysm wasn't. And that smaller aneurysm is intradural, and so it's patients in serial follow-up for this. That's just another small choroidal aneurysm that was missed on the radiology report, but is present, again, so in a patient who's being conservatively managed. And then just another small ecom aneurysm detected by the software and not seen in a stroke patient. So the idea is that RapidAI kind of offers a bunch of different solutions for aneurysm patient care in terms of triage and notifying the people who need to know that there's a patient in your hospital system that's been scanned that has an aneurysm. It also has the availability for messaging function. We don't really use this, but there's a messaging function within the app where you can use the app to message other people who are on the app. So if you have a stroke team or something like that, you can use it for ischemic disease. That same team is probably this team that helps you out with hemorrhagic disease as well. You can track your analytics and patients. You can get a monthly printout that will alert you to the number of aneurysms were detected that month. It has a link to it that gets you to surgical preview for those individual cases. And so if you wanted to, if you say weren't reviewing the cases contemporaneously or something, and you just wanted to see like, well, who came through this month that had potential aneurysms detected, you can be provided with a spreadsheet on a monthly or weekly or bi-weekly basis or whatever frequency you want, where the Rapid guys will text you a list of your people got RapidAI screens for aneurysms, and then you can just organize the list by suspected aneurysm. If you just click on that, it'll put all the yeses on the top, and then you kind of look through and look at the measurements and decide which ones that you want to look at. You can click a link and it will take you to surgical preview, and the surgical preview reconstructions are good enough if you have a good source data from MRA or CTA that you actually use them to do some pre-procedural treatment planning. So this is what the list looks like. And so if there's a possible aneurysm that was scanned, it'll show up here as like this sort of aneurysm emoji. And if the patients had priors, it'll say track CTA, and that means the patients had a prior comparative study. And so you can click on a link, and then that link will bring you to the comparison for this one. And for these ones, it'll just bring you to that surgical preview of the actual aneurysm. So you get a picture like this. It's like one of these tracks where it shows you this is what it looked like last year. This is what it looks like year before. And then you can kind of look at it and see, is this really growing, or is this there before? And this is one of these ones where you don't really know for sure, because like some dimensions it measures a little bit larger, some dimensions a little bit smaller. This is likely within the error of measurement, but again, this is why this like sort of retrospective study is so important, because what is real growth is critical in terms of interpreting these types of data, and we don't have a great handle on that right now. But you can see here this one saying this lobule is a little bit bigger, so you could just go to angio based on that and do another 3D rotational angiogram and compare if the patient had an angiogram prior. So the idea is, again, that AI, as it's available, really improves the consistency across all of your readers. So all the neuroradiologists in the system, because they have sort of a second pair of eyes looking at their work, benefit from that. And it makes the reads a little bit more uniform. So the spoke reads look a little bit more like the hub reads in terms of the accuracy. It also leads to a lot more collaboration with your referring doctors on the outside. You see refer these cases or why they're there, and it really fosters a lot more communication between you and the outside referrings, rather than somebody just showing up in clinic and them getting like a typed up note from you a couple of weeks later. It is reassuring, I think, for your neuroradiology group to know that there's a second pair of eyes looking through all the scans. And again, a lot of times you can show patients these surgical preview pictures. So for that lady with the SCA aneurysm that grew, it's very useful to show her the overlay of the two studies and show like this is where it's grown, this is where it's bigger. And for the patients, like looking from one image to the other image can be a little bit difficult, but if you have an overlay image, it can make it easier for them to appreciate. In terms of the financial impact, again, this is something we'll get at a little bit more once we have actual data, but it just depends sort of where you want to set the bar. So if you have, say, this is a real number, so 3,000 CT MRI scans have been read with the rapid aneurysm software. At a 2% rate of aneurysms, you'd expect about 78% of these 78 patients in this group would have an aneurysm. And so even if you have 8 to 10 of these that weren't detected, that you saw with the software, that are smaller, and those patients go into follow-up imaging, and then you're looking at maybe follow-up imaging at these patients for 1 year, that's going to generate, significant amount of income. If you look at treating a couple of these, like, so there were a couple, like the case that I showed, where you end up treating it where you wouldn't have detected it before, that really has a tremendous financial impact. If you look at aneurysms you are following in the clinic, if you even have a handful, 1, 2, 3 a year, that show growth, that you go back and look at and determine is real growth, like that one SCA case that I showed, one intervention, one aneurysm treatment pretty much pays for the software for the whole year. And then with follow-up imaging and stuff like that you're going to do, it even more so increases the revenue for the hospital network. And so, like, from our end, we're mostly 100% focused on patient care and taking better care of patients and being competent and not getting into medical legal trouble on a day-to-day basis. The administrators are much more focused on finances. And so when I look at stuff like this, I'd say, I want to take better care of patients. How can I make this as easy as possible for the administrators who want to help me? What ammunition can I get them to justify to the other administrative people in the group, why this is a worthwhile utilization of hospital resources? And so it's data like these where you look at, okay, well, follow-up MRA on these people yearly for 5 years is going to generate X thousands of dollars. So if we find 1 or 2 patients who have that, just that go into follow-up and don't even get treated, it's already paying for the cost of the software for a year. So in any event, that's basically my very low-level clinical overview of sort of how we're using this at Stony Brook. And so I think at this point, we could open things up for questions if you guys have any, or if you guys have additional comments.
That was fantastic, Dr. Fiorella. Thank you. I think one of the things that you've highlighted is actually just the user interface and the ease of usability of this software and how it manifests into just an increased ability to just easily navigate, these hundreds of scans that are being done on our patients, and the communication that's all built into the app itself. So that's a really powerful thing. And all of us who use Rapid on a daily basis for at least the ischemic stroke, have recognized that, just the ease of navigating the app itself and the software is fantastic. I wonder, because you're in a position to trial a lot of these products, do you know how Rapid software kind of compares to other vendors that are making similar detection or segmentation products, such as VisAI or
expertise in
AI?
that at all? Like, when we went through the process and heard from everybody, and at that time it was years ago when these were just coming out, and at that time, like, Rapid had hundreds of successful installs, including major academic institutions. And I don't know if any of you guys have dealt with IT in a university system, but they're not the most flexible people. And so you could imagine a situation where you purchase a license for a large software thing, and it gets repeatedly blocked and takes 10 years to implement because your IT people are unhappy with the HIPAA compliance or the network safety or the this or that, or it's Tuesday or whatever. And so we went with Rapid right out of the gates because the software for the ischemic stuff provided us everything that we needed, and they had so many successful installs. And since that time, they've just been tremendous in terms of their ability to interface and network with our radiology administration, our hospital IT, all the outlying hospitals that send us cases. They've just been a spectacularly enthusiastic partner in terms of helping. And then in addition, if you're willing to try to do some of this quantitative research, they've just been incredibly helpful and enthusiastic about funding any kind of additional research or projects that would sort of validate the utilization of the software. And so they really have functioned as true partners in terms of sort of not only helping this to work at Stony Brook, but also kind of advancing the science of this type of AI imaging and its application clinically. So we've been really super happy with our partnership with Rapid.
Does it, if you have another one of the vendors like for stroke, can Rapid work with that? Like for this
I don't
particular?
follow you, like another vendor, like if you have,
Let's say you have
Viz
Viz
for
or
strokers.
something. Yeah.
You have no idea.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works.
Me neither.
I just think like the idea of trying to work two different AI programs through the administration, pay two different licenses and get IT to have two different systems, I just think is not likely. That's not the hill I'm looking to die on.
Me neither.
I got a message from Ann in our for respond to one of our questions. That the training data for the data sets is available publicly. So that's nice to know. At least again, these convolutional neural networks are based on mapped data sets, and transparency on how the training occurs is certainly beneficial to everyone. We have a question from the audience. Do you have a threshold based on volume and linear changes now that you have?
Yeah, we don't really, because there's not any kind of data or evidence to guide that. So it's really, we're looking at these on like a case-by-case basis and heavily relying on kind of a manual assessment of the source imaging to see how high quality the MRA is, to look for movement and things like that that could make this artifact actually look bigger or smaller. And so we're relying on both. Again, it's like a second pair of eyes. So that the Rapid software suggests there's been a significant growth in volume, then it's one that will bring up the imaging and we'll just scrutinize it much more closely in terms of looking at it, like with that lady with the SCA. But there's no like set threshold. But that's what kind of Raisin and Gang are trying to establish, is kind of what are the normal standard deviations for MRA versus MRA, CTA versus CTA, and in terms of like prospective studies, it'd be interesting even just to scan a person, do an MRA in one scanner and then do an MRA in another scanner across the hall and just get a data set of 20 of those people and see what the variance looks like. Doesn't seem like there's too many more questions.
Sorry, having some
There's a
technical-
couple questions here. One from Chinten. He was wondering if it's premature, but does RapidAI or other AI provide parent vessel diameter before and after the aneurysmal segment if it detects or it does not measure?
I haven't used it for that. I think it can under surgical preview because initially when we got surgical preview, it was prior to the availability of sim and cure and that kind of stuff. And I recall using it, they had some software at some point to like look at various sizes of flow diverters and stuff. So I think they do have that capacity, but the Rapid guys would know a little bit more. Again, I don't really use it for surgical treatment planning to that level of detail. Like we'll usually do an angiogram and use that source data to predict sort of a flow diverter size.
That was the other question, was really around, is it kind of like a sim and cure where you could size a flow diverter or first coil or a web or something?
I think you could do stuff like that, but in terms of the utility of that, I think if you're going to go through the trouble of using a program to assist treatment, you're going to do that off the angiographic data rather than cross-section.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a better data set.
There's another question. I don't know if you got this brief from Ahmed. Hi, Ahmed Yusuf or Roshan. Hi, Dr. Fiorella, is this software capable of predicting the outcomes of treatments such as flow diversion or coiling?
Not really. I mean, it's not really designed for that so much, I think. That'd be more sort of intraoperative treatment, looking at angiographic disruption of contrast and transit times and computational fluid dynamics and that kind of thing. So I don't think they're moving in that direction.
I think that there is, again, potential for that, several years down the road for using these neural networks for that very purpose, comparing an aneurysm and comparing, the neural network detecting aneurysm morphology and using its internal data set to compare a similar aneurysm X to a similar aneurysm that it has been trained on. And then through a series of layers, develop some type of either rupture risk profile and or, modeling for clinical decision support, or, outputting some type of risk stratification for, this aneurysm compared to hundreds of other similar aneurysms treated with, a pipeline stent will produce a cure in, 70% or something like that. So I think that's a really good question. I think the technology is probably not there yet, but it's certainly something to be aware of the very powerful strength of this software. One of the comments says that please note that the RapidAI aneurysm software can be installed even if an alternative competitive stroke AI software is being used at the institution. So reach out to your local RapidAI representative. So that answers the Bree's first question. So that's a great usability. We have a couple more minutes, Dr. Fiorella. I was actually just personally would like your opinion on this at the risk of some editorialization. Given the recent regulations on AI in general, which has been put into place for monitoring safety and regulatory measures against, in general, generative AI. What, in your opinion, are the perils or the dangers of this technology? Should we have a modicum of concern, or is there anything to worry about in the future, or is there any kind of concern that you have of this technology or the dangers of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it advanced to the point where it's being relied on too heavily, and that if the AI came back negative, but people weren't actually looking at the studies, that potentially be something that could be dangerous. But I mean, if you're just using it the way that we're using it, it's just basically a second layer of protection. So it's just all conservative stuff. So there's no decisions that are being made by the AI. It's just something that's, alerting you to take a closer look at the pictures yourself and of things that might have changed, or an aneurysm that might be there that wasn't necessarily picked up on the original read. So we're not really using it to replace any human evaluation of the imaging. So provided that humans are doing at least the regular sort of meeting the bar of their normal performance, I think this can only help if it's used in this manner.
I don't think that we have any other questions. We're exactly at the hour mark. Any final comments, Bree or Dr. Fiorella?
Oh, this was great.
Thanks for
Thank
the
you so
opportunity.
much. Yeah, super interesting. And it's nice that it could be used piecemeal if you have other stuff. I think just that triage is and looking at the change in aneurysms is like super helpful. That's a really hard thing for humans to evaluate quickly. Whereas if they're calculating a volume set, that seems like a really high utility aspect of the program.
Yeah, agreed.
I agree. I think, yeah, this was fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Fiorella, for showing the usability and the practicality of this very, very powerful tool. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rapid. I hope you guys all learned something, and please reach out to your local Rapid AI representative, any other help, and we will see you all shortly.
Yep.
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks for joining. Happy Monday.
Thank you, Dr. Fiorella.